I will talk about painting urbanscape, and I want to discuss 5 important considerations when planning and executing your painting. I linked the full painting process video in the description below, and in this shorter video I want to discuss just the important things that I discovered when working on a number of landscape and urbanscapes. First piece of advice I have right away is select your color palette in advance. It seems kind of obvious when we look at a reference photo, the sky is blue, the trees are green, the grass is lighter green color. But when it comes down to pigments, it really pays off to select a limited palette. First of all, select the exact blues and greens that you will be using. And of course, paint a little swatch on just some scrap paper that you have, I'm sure, lying around, and make sure that all these colors look harmonious with each other. The colors I will be using in this painting are Schmincke super granulating watercolors. Mostly I use the line that's called Forest. It has great green colors in it. Plus I used Galaxy Rose, and I thought Galaxy Blue will be great as well for that color palette, but somehow it didn't work with my greens. So after painting a swatch, I decided to substitute it with Daniel Smith's Cobalt Blue that's on my regular palette, and I'm glad I did it in advance so I didn't mess up the sky and I didn't have to regret just using the color that manufacturer included in that Galaxy line of super granulating watercolors. The second piece of advice that I have is work from an on-location sketch if at all possible, or make a small sketch from the reference photo first before starting work on a larger sheet of paper. You see me transferring a black and white sketch onto my watercolor paper. This is actually an enlargement of the on-location sketch, and I'll put the reference photo and my sketch side by side so you can see it better, and you see that even the overall composition is pretty close to the reference photo. Somehow there is more sky, there is more ground, everything is very small, it's hard to see the details. So my firm belief is that working from reference photos only is a lot more difficult, and you lose that immediacy, that feeling of being in that landscape. And the only way to figure out the amount of detail, the exact composition, the exact scale is to have an on-location sketch, even a very quick one that you can use in combination with the actual reference photo. The third thing that I discovered when working on this and some other landscapes and urbanscapes is that it's very important to work in layers and to keep the tonal relationships in the painting balanced at all times. When I started, I would sometimes approach a landscape kind of the same way I do like animal portraits or flower paintings, when I would start with a light wash, then add the darkest darks, and they balance overall tonal relationships. I think landscapes are so complex, they have so many objects and details in them that approach is really difficult unless maybe you're super experienced and super skillful in them. I think going step by step, gradually building your painting from light to mid-tone to shadows, not in sections, but working on the whole composition is a lot safer and will be a lot more successful. So in some areas where applied too much color, they will kind of jar and stand out too much. I would lift the color and just wait for that layer to dry and then add more intensity. So working layer by layer and balancing the whole painting is very important, I would say, for any subject matter, but for landscapes especially. And I will mention here as well, as I was working on this painting, I kept telling myself vertical objects will be darker and horizontal objects will be lighter. For some reason, I always over darken the ground. I think it's a trick of the eye when looking at the reference photo. The shadows, especially in the bright sun like this one, this is Texas, we have very intense sunlight here, clear blue sky. It can be really confusing in terms of tonal relationships. So it's much better to leave horizontal surfaces, especially large ones like the ground. It's important to leave them light. You can always give them another wash and darken them if they don't look right, but over darkening them makes the whole landscape lose that sunlight. Another confusing thing is this one was that the building was very light gray, and even though it's a vertical wall, it was still very light. So squinting when looking at the reference photo to check the tonal relationships, and also the fact that I already had my initial sketch that was fairly successful, and I was looking at that sketch in black and white. I printed it in black and white to transfer it onto watercolor paper. I think it helped me enormously to bring that urbanscape to successful completion. The next tip is kind of a matter of your preference in terms of technique. When painting with watercolor, I find it very difficult to create straight lines. I work on 300-pound watercolor paper. It's cold pressed, has quite a bit of texture. So paint on a brush on a textured surface, it's hard to create hard edges with that paint. It runs a little bit, it goes into all those crevices. So what I found helped me a lot is using color pencils in combination with watercolor. The painting does not look like mixed media. The pencils eventually, if you use them sparingly, they blend with watercolor. I also use a ruler. Nothing wrong with getting help if you need it, instead of messing up your painting. So using color pencils to create straight lines, verify your perspective, and just in general, develop the details a little bit better, a little bit sharper. I find it very helpful, but it's a matter of personal preference and a matter of your technique and the amount of time that you can dedicate to each painting. Even though this all looks very soft, kind of rustic landscape, there were a lot of straight lines, a lot of electric poles, telephone poles, whatever they are. It's a railroad crossing. So painting all this with watercolor was very difficult, and I found that pencils helped me a lot. And if you don't want to use color pencils, I would at least use regular graphite pencil. Just make sure you use it on top of watercolor, not underneath, because if you mess up, you will always be able to gently erase it to get all your lines straight, all your electric poles standing straight up. And I would also sketch in the power lines. They give nice detail to the landscape, but they're hard to do with a brush. You will see in just a second, I will be trying to draw them with a liner brush, and I messed up. I had to wipe one of them off. At the end of the day, I'm still not very happy with them. I should have drawn them with a regular pencil and made sure they look all right before I started doing them with watercolor. This leads me to my last tip that's kind of related to the previous one. When working on watercolor landscape and urbanscape especially, it's very tempting to add all the details that we see in the reference photo. Every little mullion on the window, every little step, every door handle, every branch on the tree. But if we want that fresh look, and if we really consider what do we see in bright sunlight in reality, we really don't see all these details. So it's important to pick just the right amount of details, get back the highlights with opaque white if that's the way you work, if you're not using masking, and add darkest darks, darkest details, but very sparingly without overwhelming your painting and drying it, kind of, not getting that dry look with too many details. If the viewers can understand, this is an old building by the railroad crossing. That's all we need to convey with our painting. And in my case, I was using those super granulating paints, and I stopped myself just in time to avoid ruining that beautiful granulating texture that I saw on paper and overwhelming it with too many details and covering it up with subsequent layers. So that will keep your painting very energetic, filled with sunlight, fresh, airy, and very attractive to the viewer. I hope those few pointers that I mentioned in this video will be useful to you. If you think of something else from your experience painting landscapes and urbanscapes, please don't hesitate to mention it in comments. I really appreciate you all commenting on my videos. I always read all of them. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one here on Tamara Studios channel. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!